Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by our first sponsor, TireGet.com. That's TireGet.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement. We really believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, for episode number 59. Help me out there, Tanner, with the assist. Episode number 59, fast approaching 100 episodes, fast approaching 1 million downloads on the audio platforms. Now now I'm positive. We're getting throttled. We're getting throttled on YouTube big time. When I first started the podcast in the first couple of weeks, um, all the episodes were popping up. You search Royce White, and because I never really put any content up on YouTube myself personally, and because the mainstream media industrial complex has done everything they possibly can to keep me out of the limelight or have any type of real microphone or megaphone, I should say, to tell you all the truth, just have sane, logical dialogue. That's exactly what they know that I'm capable of. Um, I never had content that was very current. It was always something from 10 years ago. You can go there now and you'll see there's videos from 10 years ago. There's videos from 11 years ago. There's videos from the big three, 5 seasons ago. I mean, we've had 3 seasons since then. But when I first started putting the podcast up, you had our thumbnails, our episodes would pop right up, right? At my channel that was now, growing quickly, and it have all the latest episodes just listed right under there. Now, if you put my name in YouTube, you'll see um, that they just have the collapsed channel visible. So you'll see a video, and then a video beneath that, and in the middle, there's this little collapsed bar that has my YouTube channel, and that's a telltale sign that we're being throttled, or we're being decatalogued, we're being deprioritized by the algorithm there at YouTube. But doesn't matter. We have some plans in mind to push more content, pump more content. Look, you gotta realize the people who are being censored is much like the fate of our society now and the fate of our citizenship. Yeah, they can do it, but it all falls back on you. It all falls back on the viewers. It all falls back on the organic nature of engagement and growth of engagement in a channel. There are channels out there like Jason Whitlock's, who's also very hard to find, but he has such a big audience that it continues to it's become it's groundswell, right? Become a thing of its own. So we plan to continue to get the content out. No plans to stop. Definitely not discouraged by by big tech or their censorship, and it's not unexpected. So nothing really significant to change that. We're going to keep moving right along. We appreciate your viewership and your listenership again this evening. We hope you had a great weekend. We hope you enjoyed last Friday's guest episode with the great Jason Whitlock. If you haven't seen that already, please go see that now. I hope you got a chance to tune into Fearless with Jason Whitlock earlier tonight at 6 p.m. and tuned into our conversation there. Um, a lot of things going on culturally. I mean, everything from the LGBTQism and the predation on our young people, our children, the nation's youth, to this UFO phenomenon that is now getting bigger than I maybe have ever seen in my entire lifetime. I mean, just from an algorithmic standpoint, the machine is pumping out content about UFOs. Maybe I'm just watching it. I don't know. Tanner, does it seem like you're getting a lot of UFO content in the last couple of weeks? Tanner says yes. Um, a lot of crazy stuff going on out there. I mean, the weather, you got all of Canada's on fire. I mean, all of Canada caught fire in one fell swoop, and you got this crazy yellow, uh, I don't know, yellow cloud, yellow dust, yellow smog that all but engulfed New York City, and obviously a magnificent feat of architectural design like New York City looks, I don't know, jaw dropping with a cloud of natural yellow smog behind it. Not to say that it's natural yellow smog, but it's not filtered from a video production standpoint, right? People make all these kind of videos and they color grade and things like that behind a beautiful backdrop like New York City to give it certain texture and element. But this is smoke that actually came down from the Canadian wildfires. And who can say why the Canadian wildfires happened and they happened all at once? Natural? I don't know. I don't know. Could it be man made? Everything could be man made in this era. We have to keep that door open. I think that's prudent. So there's a lot of things going on culturally. Today, I want to go back and introduce you to an individual that many may have missed in their formative education, their public school education, their mainstream media industrial complex education. And often you'll hear me say that the police are the lowest rung of the military industrial complex. Well, schools, public schools, are the lowest rung of the media industrial complex, and both of them sit underneath the military. Both of them sit underneath the medical industrial complex in many ways, and we'll talk about some of that as we get around to it today. But I want to introduce you to a man I've mentioned before, a man that is as tied in with the New World Order as you possibly can be. In fact, he wrote the manuscript, he wrote the playbook, he wrote the battle plan for the New World Order, or a significant chapter turn in the New World Order after World War II. A man by the name of Zbigniew Brzezinski. That's Zbigniew Brzezinski. Feel free to look him up. This guy's as spooky as they come. And you may know him from his guest appearances on Morning Joe, which I call Morning Mika because Joe's a cuck and Mika's running the show. And Daddy Zigbinyu's been running the show for a long time. And Mika knows, Mika's there for a reason. Let's just say that. Um, but I want to get into Zbigniew Brzezinski. Um, Zbigniew is to start off before I play you this reference video to help you better understand globalism, because I think I say globalism and people still go, what do you really mean by that? Right? This thing I say, New World Order. And some of you know, some of you are the Alex Jones fans and the Steve Bannon fans and the Trumpers and viewers of Jason Whitlock. So some of you are familiar, but some of you are just organically organic new followers and subscribers to the podcast, and some of this terminology may escape you. Um, Globalism. It's an economic attack on a nation's citizens, their citizenship itself, and the economic value of their citizenship through foreign policy. And that's exactly what we've been living under in this country since World War II. And the post World War II democratic liberal order was the philosophical the philosophical framework that ushered in this chapter of globalism. Not that the idea for globalism wasn't always there. The Romans were globalists, the Germans were globalists, the Mongols were globalists, the British Empire were the sine qua non of modern globalism. The Chinese are globalists. The list goes on and on and on. America, in many ways, actually was never a globalist nation. We adopted the foreign policy of three other globalist empires, and I'm going to talk more about that today because just so happens that Daddy Zbigniew is one of the progenitors of America's current foreign policy, and you'll see in many of the videos that you can pull up, he's regarded as one of the most influential foreign policy minds. But Zbigniew is a product of the realism, the school of international realism, which if you're familiar with politics, this idea of realpolitik came from really flourished in the international school of realism, and its forefather is Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, in fact, Zbigniew Brzezinski is one of the graduate students of Henry Kissinger. Another understudy of Henry Kissinger would be our boy Klaus Schwab. And you'll see and hear the distinct similarities between a Klaus Schwab and a Zbigniew Brzezinski, although Klaus has made his way to the forefront of much of global discussion, has more of a prominent popularity, I would say, than Zbigniew ever had. That's not by accident. Zbigniew is the real juice. Zbigniew Brzezinski was the real juice of this post World War II democratic liberal order. Klaus Schwab is a figure that's just latched on, and none of his ideas are really his own. He's just kind of a mouthpiece, and Swiss German. he's the product of a Swiss Nazi engineer, military engineer. So that's who Zbigniew is. He's a understudy of Henry Kissinger, and he helped facilitate an organization called the Trilateral Commission, which you'll hear many people talk about in the conservative movement, or anybody who's really anti-establishment. The Trilateral Commission is another one of these groups, like the Bilderberg group, that gets scapegoated as nothing more than conspiracy theory, when in fact they operate right out there in the open, and you can go to their website or their Wikipedia, even if you're lazy, and see exactly what they're all about. But here in this video, Daddy Zbigniew Brzezinski is going to tell you exactly what the Trilateral Commission is about, and we're going to talk about it after that.
Last year, we were fortunate to establish the Brzezinski Institute on Geostrategy. You said that we should make the focus of this analyzing how geography and history is shaping analytic thinking. Why did you recommend that?
Well, because in my lifespan, and also looking backwards, most of international affairs involved the interaction of history and geography. It seemed to me that that would be the case in the years to come for quite a while. So it's important to look at it, but to look at it through new prisms, new perspectives. It's going to be a very different world from the world that we have been living in. Just to cite one example, until very recently, there was this quest among major powers for one of them to emerge dominant. None of them actually ever did completely, except one, and that's the United States. And that's roughly between 1944 and God knows when, 70s, 80s, and thereabouts. It's impossible. But the situation remains both fluid and unstable, unpredictable and dangerous. And therefore, the whole thought of how geography and strategy interact pertains to what factors today are being critical in shaping the posture and aspirations and strategy and diplomacy and capacity for warfare among the major players. And of these, three stand out: the United States, China, and Russia. And it should be in our interest, perceived interest, in which we're always in a better relationship with one of the other two than any one of them has a relationship like ours.
You've been watching the world stage for your entire career. You've seen it from a much larger, more strategic dimension. How do you interpret China's rise as a nation, as a geopolitical development?
Well, I think it's ultimately a basic turning point in human affairs, because China has been historically paramount. But over whom? The neighbors of China during the days of China's historical primacy really didn't amount to much. And at some points it was the neighbors who took over China and then infused it with a sense of direction. I have in mind, of course, the Mongols, the Tatars, and so forth. So it varies. I think we as a nation have an exaggerated sense on the public level of the degree to which the world is prepared to follow us, especially because of developments in recent years. And we have a considerable and understandable hesitation about becoming more and more militarily involved. Well, that is the effect of the last several decades. So we are in a situation in which, in fact, leadership has to be in some fashion, not exactly even, but in some fashion more or less shared. And the big challenge to America is how to manipulate both the Russians and the Chinese, that it is desirable and advantageous to one or the other to have a better relationship with us than with either Russia with China or China with Russia. And if we can pull this off, we can still be in a leadership position. If not, we will be in a continuous mess of uncertainty and doubt, and probably the international situation will get worse and worse. And I am afraid I lean somewhat towards the latter. We are living in a kind of fool's world in which we think our preeminence is going to endure in its own, and don't quite realize that we'll have to have a leadership that's far more able to lead the public in the direction of global cooperation on the basis of some competition, but also much accommodation, and that we'll have to maneuver rather than impose in order to have things happen the way we would like them to take place. So it's going to be a much more difficult age. And as I said earlier, it'll be vastly complicated by the fact that it will increasingly overlap with the global crisis, the crisis of global nature, the crisis of global realities, the crisis of global climate and temperature. How you mash those two realities together is mind-boggling, and it's going to be the survival challenge for our children, grandchildren certainly.
Stop. Okay. Now, you see me wearing the NASA hat, and I'm wearing the NASA hat because I like these hats, actually. They field grade NASA hats, not a plug. They're not a sponsor or anything like that. Maybe we should get them to sponsor the show. I'd love to keep wearing the hats, but obviously I'm being facetious, right? Because this is the great herald of the military-industrial complex being moralists and ethicalists, right? In their Operation Paperclip. I mean, the entire NASA apparatus was started by the Nazis, and I bring the Nazis up on the tail end of that video to help articulate who Zbigniew Brzezinski really is. Everything you heard is really an anti-Russia, pro-China promotion. That's what he was saying. We're anti-Russia, and he's Poles. You got to realize the Poles, they hate the Russians. They do not like the Russians whatsoever. They're another group that, it was said that the Nazis really, ran over the Poles, and sure, they persecuted some Polish Jews, but in terms of the Poles themselves, many of the Poles laid down and joined happily. Okay, um, in my opinion. Now, are there some Polish people out there who rejected the Nazi war machine and the Nazi idea? Of course, but there was enough of affectation with Nazism and the German ideology that still resonated after the Second World War was over. And here you have people like Brzezinski, who is just extremely, extremely anti-Russian. And they're saying the quiet part out loud. Now, the reason I played that video for you is that was 6 years ago was that video posted. And 6 years ago, I mean, this was 2017. And we're gonna play another video for you here in a moment that also highlights some very alarming globalist ideologies that was posted 11 years ago. This is 2014. This is right around the time that the Crimea incident took place, and Russia took Crimea, and there was a huge international controversy, international jump ball about Crimea, and that kind of kicked off what would become the conflict today in many ways between Russia and NATO. But all in all, the propaganda you just heard was very anti-Russian. And let me tell you what Zbigniew's pitch is. His pitch is that America's dominance, America was the only one of the three to actually ever achieve dominance. And because of that, we have to break America of that dominance, because America having that dominance is just too volatile. It's too unpredictable. We have to break America's dominance. We have to become a more cooperative nation. And and more specifically, our cooperation is revolves around this uh, three-player, which I call the four-player jump ball, because we the people actually have a stake in it, and it's separate from these three globalist governments. But the three-player jump ball, we must always manipulate, and he says right there we have to manipulate Russia and China. But really, he means China. Because really, what he's saying is that we need to throw in with the Chinese, our relationship with one should always be better than our relationship with the other or their relationship together. Um, and that's just a pro-China pitch, right? The Chinese and the American economy have very strategic, interests together, where we're really the tributary state, and we're the leading tributary state as a figurehead for the entire Western Europe or the entire West. And that relationship works fine. We'll be a tributary state to China. And I'm going to show you evidence to back up that theory later on. But these people see China, they admire what China has built. Now, the real catch is they helped build what China has built. They helped create what China has built. So when they say, oh, we're living in a changing world, they act like the change in the world is spontaneous or that the change in the world is somehow, this natural law of physics. And they even talk about China as being the rise of China as being a matter of natural physics. They even science, they even create this sort of scientific, I want to call it scientific euphemism for the rise of China. It's like, it's like I forgot what it is, the inexorable law of thermodynamic, I don't something like that, some super nerdy and super intellectual, science based, right? But anyway, the rise of China was inevitable. It was inevitable. There was nothing anybody could do about it. That's a lie. That's a lie. Henry Kissinger and Nixon and all these other Atlanticist elites saw China as this perfect opportunity to weaponize the workforce, to turn them into demo- a democracy, into Democrats, into liberals, and by way of they would hold the supremacy over the entire Chinese people as a means for labor, slavery. Really, what it was, they tried to subdue the Chinese people ideologically with the idea of democracy and materialism. What they didn't realize at the time, or maybe they did, is that the Chinese people, the CCP and the elites in China already had their own ideas. They had already been touched by Mao. They had already been touched by Marxism. And in fact, when you look at it that way, maybe they didn't believe, maybe in fact, and this is actually the case. I don't want to say maybe, but I don't want to say definitively either because I wasn't in the room. But it would appear that your intellectuals like Henry Kissinger and that entire post World War II democratic liberal order cachet of international politicians use democracy and capitalism as a scapegoat, no, as a stopgap meaning the time in between. They use capitalism and democracy as a stopgap to get to communism. And that's why I said before, when you take, the order, the ideological horsemen of the apocalypse are first secularism, then communism, then liberalism, and then finally globalism. And if you take liberalism and communism and merge them together, you get globalism. It went on a trajectory to get to where we are today. But I mean, if you look across 300 years, it's not a long time. 300 to 400 years is not a long time to uphold an intellectual tradition. 500 years. Let's go back to the post Enlightenment Europe, 1400, 1500s. It's not a long time to uphold intellectual traditions. It's not a long time to pass those things down. A lot of us think it's a long time to pass things down because in our families, we pass down memories. We pass down love. We pass down relationships. I just was at a funeral of my uncle and there was no prevailing ideology that our uncle left us. No, he just left us the memories of him being a good guy and doing good deeds for the family whenever he had the opportunity, whenever his circumstance allowed. But there were no ideological inheritance, inheritance. Not like Mika. Oh, Mika probably has an entire library of ideological inheritance that she won't even be able to access until she makes it far enough up the Masonic pyramid or whatever the female equivalent is of Masonry, Freemasonry. And it's funny because in the video it says, yeah, here's the Brzezinski Institute. We were able to create the Brzezinski Institute. What a benchmark of international intellectual um, education. So yeah, no, it was always the case that, in my opinion, it was always the case that Kissinger and that whole era of politicians meant to use capitalism and democracy as a pitch and a stopgap to make their way to communism. And their communist, the apple of their communist eye was in China. China, already infused with Maoist communism, already had a sort of communist and a communist framework, and also they have a 5,000 to 6,000 year old civilization that has went through nonstop civil war to weed out all the people who dissent against the power structure. And that's what the people have to understand in this week for our family and friends episode, which will air on Wednesday, we believe. Hope so. It's going to air on Wednesday. Maybe we air it tomorrow just so we can come back on Wednesday and talk about it. I'm not quite sure yet. But anyway, we're going to be interviewing Rushan, who is a Uyghur advocate, a Uyghur herself, but she's an advocate for the Uyghurs. And her sister was taken in 2018, and they have not heard from her since. So that should be a very powerful and informative interview to give you a look on the inside of the CCP and how some of the people there are treated. But the reason why they don't have dissent in China is because they went through a 4,000-year civil war. They've killed all the people. I mean, Mao took all the people out, and the people like Zbigniew, mind you, during the Mao Revolution, they took all those people out in the alley or in the back or out in the shed, and they just shot them all. I mean, that's the truth. That's the God's honest truth. They just shot them all. It's the reality, and it's much of how the Chinese operate now. And there's no hiding that. They're not really trying to hide that. It's called the Chinese Communist Party for a reason. And President Xi shows his affectation for Mao Zedong all the time. He talks about it openly. Okay. So you remember, Mao was brought into to power in China by us. Everybody looks at Mao's rise or the Mao Revolution like it was spontaneous, like it was organic. It wasn't organic. Mao didn't rise to power organically. We aided, we aided the revolutionaries, the Mao revolutionaries, in fighting the emperor, the leader there in China. We aided that. We helped that. We facilitated that. So communist China was always the apple of these people's eye, and now what we see with the turn of global policy, it shows. And Zbigniew isn't shy in telling the world. He's not shy about this is these are the thought leaders of the MSNBCs. These are the professorial mentors of Rachel Maddows and all these other aristocratic, higher educated wine society white women and cucks as well. The Yuval Noah Hararis. These are their mentors. These people train them intellectual tradition. And he says right there, hey, China. And let me show you what they're really doing here. China is going to have supremacy. Russia's out. They've always been fighting Russia. They've been fighting Russia since since time immemorial of the West. They've been fighting Russia. Every 20 to 30 to 50 years, some jerk off wants to conquer Russia. And I'm not a Russian apologist. I don't trust Russia. It's not beyond me that Russia's still a hidden communist nation. They certainly have a communist history. Many people would argue that Russia is hiding in the weeds and they're just putting on this capitalist and Eastern Orthodox front to hide their communism. Not past a communist to do. Not past a communist, or three different groups of communists to fight each other. And that was Yuri. That was the KGB turn whistleblower Yuri, who told us how the communists and the Marxist revolutions always work. The Marxists and the communists eventually turn on each other, and they kill whoever rises to power because they actually want the power. So maybe Russia, China, and the American elites are all in on it together. They're just in one big communist race for supremacy. Wouldn't shock me at all. However, the the propaganda right now is explicitly anti-Russian. I mean, it's right out there in the open. They're not even hiding it. They are not trying to layer it with anything with anything. They're just sending it right down the pipe for you. We're anti-Russian. We're pro-Chinese. If we can, we'll manipulate the international power dynamic by aligning with the Chinese. We will not be aligning with the Russians. We will manipulate the Russians to ensure that the Russians and the Chinese never have a stable relationship. And that's what he said. But the real key to Zbignew's little segment there, the real key is at the end, environmentalism. Environmentalism is what's going to bring everybody together, right? And this is a very, very, very wicked, deceitful, pernicious part of this globalist ideology that everybody's going to rally around environmentalism. Well, let's talk about environmentalism. Another thing that Henry Kissinger and Nixon uh, brought to to American policy, but also the global stage, the EPA, right? The Environmental Protection Agency, instituted and founded during Nixon himself was the one who instituted the EPA, along with taking us off the gold standard. I mean, Nixon and Kissinger, these guys went to work on American citizenship like like nobody's business. Yeah, you had going off of the gold standard, the EPA, opening China as the great new horizon, and to cap it, Roe v. Wade, which wasn't Nixon, but I mean, hey, executive order, not going to kill the kids. I'm just saying. But anyway, this whole thing kind of works together, and I want to help you explain this scam to you. Um, I didn't even think about the petrodollar, but the petrodollar would come a little later with Kissinger, but he was the guy who manufactured the petrodollar. But I want, and if you want to reference this type of information, you can go back to one of our earlier episodes where I interviewed Chris Martinson, and he and I talked at length about the petrodollar and its effect on the American economy and what its implications were in its inception. And the whole Kissinger model, the whole globalist model, the whole post World War II democratic liberal order model is that the best way to avert another world war or another set of world wars is to create an international and economic codependency that markets and economies had to be dependent on one another. They had to have a vested interest. They had to have a shared interest that would ensure a cooperation and collaboration, right? In order to survive at that level, almost a strategic interweaving of international economies to where it would almost be a suicidal of a nation to go to war with any other nation. And many people looked at that and said, that makes sense. Boomers that believed in the dollar, boomers that believed in free market enterprise and trade and the power of the markets, people that believed in capitalism, absolute capitalism. People believed in that. They ate it up. They chewed it up. The radical materialists chewed it up because they said, yeah, of course. If you make a person's strategic interest, if you stake a person's strategic interest on their international relationships and cooperation, of course nobody will ever go to war. That was fucking stupid. Okay, that was just. I mean, if I had been there, I'd have said, "Nah, that's fucking dumb," and it is fucking dumb because it presumes that money is everything, but money is not everything, especially when you're at the level where you print the money. When you're at the level where you print the money, you start to see very quickly that money isn't everything because if it was, there'd be no way that we would just pass a bill to raise the debt ceiling and print $1.6 trillion on top of an already $33 trillion national debt, which we can't pay back right now. And even more so, take the cap off the debt ceiling altogether so the Biden administration can spend as much money as they need in this new war or endeavor against um, the Russians and potentially the Chinese as well, which will be staged. But hey, we'll talk about that in a moment. So Kissinger's whole goal was, hey, if we make all these economies dependent on each other, well, that's the best deterrence we have. Yeah, with the backdrop of nuclear weapons and strong military deterrence. But the real deterrence is global economies, globalism again. And the germ seed that would rise up culturally to connect all these international economies, this global economy. Environmentalism, environmentalism. But let me tell you what's really happening here. Kissinger knew, and this is my opinion. Kissinger knew that America had independence, that America had true self-sufficiency within its borders. So the first thing to do was to break down America's self-sufficiency, because if not, then America would lead the way. America would continue to dominate. The first thing to do was to get America pulled into World War II in a geopolitical hellstorm. Okay, and I don't mean the war itself. I mean in the policy that precede that and the policy that would come afterward. And that's exactly what happened. And the first way to do it was Bretton Woods Conference. We're going to restructure the entire global monetary system around the Americans to get them in on the game, right? The United States dollar will become the reserve currency. Now we got the Americans drawn in. And because the Americans are drawn in, they will use their growing military prowess to protect that international interest, which they newly believe will deter them from war and make them the biggest dog on the yard. Right there, we were being undermined. Right then, we were being compromised. As soon as the American dollar's stability was hedged on our international relationships, many people saw that as empowering, but really it was destabilizing, because now the 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 value of the dollar relies on the full faith of the people, and not just the American people anymore, the people all around the world. Everywhere our dollar is the reserve currency. Now the power of the dollar, the value of the dollar depends on the faith in the dollar and in the American economy. Right there, we were being compromised by Henry Kissinger and everybody involved in Bretton Woods Conference and the institution or inception of a financial the institution or inception of financial cartels like the World Bank and the IMF. Right there, America was being chipped away at, and so they got to pull America in first. They pull America in. Now, America adopts three sets of foreign policy. As you remember, Germany is torn to pieces, right? Their government is no more. They're under the stewardship of the newly created United Nations that has now stripped Germany and put all these sanctions on Germany's ability to have a military and heavy reparations and economic sanctions as well. So Germany's defanged, Japan is defanged, and the British Empire is defanged on paper. They're defanged on paper. So we adopted those three foreign policies. We adopted Germany's foreign policy. That's Operation Paperclip and Operation Barbarossa, where we used the remnants of the Nazi war machine scattered all through the Germanic area to run counterintelligence on the new target of our globalist realpolitik ideology, the Russians. And we've been at the war with the Russians ever since. And you know what? The Russians regret it. The Russians resent it, because the Russians, they're saying, we gave 18 million soldiers to hold back the Nazi war machine. We gave 18 million soldiers to ensure that the Nazis wouldn't take control over the Eurasian world island. And here you guys turn all of your military towards us. But they were communists at the time. And so a great sales pitch was, we got to fight communism. We got to fight those communists. Who would have thunk that we had communists here in the West the entire time that were leading the charge, just like a communist. People aren't always who they say they are. People are not always who they purport themselves to be. It's like the people who say we're Christians, but they aid and abet in the destruction of Christianity as an institution, and they will eventually aid and abet in the rounding up, persecution, prosecution, and execution of Christians as well. People aren't always who they say they are. We said we were Democrats and capitalists, but if I look through the history, all I see is communists here in the West. But anyway, pull the Americas in, we take on the foreign policy of the Germans, of the British, and of Japan. And that's been the foreign policy to this very day. We still have a very German, British, Japanese foreign policy. And Zbigniew saying it right there. I mean, he's saying, hey, the Russians and the Chinese. And if you're not familiar with that history, I mean, he went into a more, an even older history about the Mongols and conquering China and the Tartars and conquering China, or having their reign as a regime there in China, and infusing them with this sense of supremacy. Global supremacy is what he was really trying to say. But another group that he left out, not by accident, were the Japanese. The Japanese war machine also all but subdued and conquered China and planned to use China, in a parasitic way. Right? The Japanese war machine wanted to take control of China's labor force, and we said, "Oh no, wait a second, there, Japan. Actually, we'll be doing that." Okay. After World War II, Japan's knee deep, neck deep, chin deep, and China and the China labor force and imperializing China, and World War II happens, and all of a sudden, hey, America, atomic bomb, nukes Japan twice, and they said, no, 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 we'll be taking that Chinese workforce. We that there's a good idea. I think we'll do that. So we adopt this foreign policy, and we have this foreign policy today, but I want to circle back to the environmentalism and how the environmentalism plays a role. So what Kissinger knew was we have to break down America's dominance, their self-sufficiency. What's the best way to break down America's self-sufficiency? In an industrializing society, in a society that's rapidly becoming industrialized, energy is going to be supreme. The best way to break down America's self-sufficiency is to make them energy dependent on another part of the world, a part of the world that they can't walk to, a part of the world that they have to fly to or go by sea, right? Because that provides an entire different set of dynamics, both in trade and business, but also militarily. And this is how we got hooked into the Saudis. This is how we got hooked into the petrodollar. And it was believed that the petrodollar was this global economic mechanism that would never be threatened. This is how we were able to print money. This is how we traditionally, after World War II, were able to print as much money as we needed to, whenever we needed to. We could print the money because the Saudis held all of the liquid gold. The currency wasn't based or backed on gold. It was now backed on liquid gold, and the direction and the trajectory and the forecast of oil futures is what determined the power and the strength of the dollar. So you had the reserve currency, the United States dollar is the reserve currency backed by liquid gold, and our dollar went everywhere. It became the biggest export of the American economy, which it still is today. Although our Saudi friends seem to be taking a different turn. And I'll get there in a moment. But anyway, the way to break America's self-sufficiency is to make them energy dependent on another nation, on another part of the world. Okay, so now we're energy dependent over there on the Eurasian world island. Again, this goes back to Mackinder. This is the Mackinder world island theory. This is the Mackinder Eurasian world island theory, that he who controls Eastern Europe controls the heartland. He who controls the heartland controls the Eurasian world island. This is a European intellectual tradition. This is the tradition of the crown. Mackinder was funded by the crown to take a Eurocentric dominant model, world philosophy, and explain it away to all the other academic institutions. And this is what you see from the European wine society, this aristocratic intellectualism, right? And we went right along with it, right? Roosevelt, the Atlanticists, the Atlantic Charter, this idea of the Atlanticists, we're Europeans, and we adopted this European philosophy, and we're going to see it out we're going to see it through. It wasn't until Donald Trump questioned the very existence of NATO itself, or the way that NATO works, that people even started to think of America as being separate from Europe. So the whole Mackinder world island theory is in the interest of the crown of Europe. It was Mackinder telling the crown, it was Mackinder, Jonathan Halford Mackinder, or Halford John Mackinder, telling the crown, in the future, you cannot be a naval power. You cannot be solely a naval power. You're going to have to evolve. You're going to have to evolve the strength of the nation um, to accommodate the evolution of ground transportation. Okay, train, train, vehicle, whatever the case may be. You're going to have to evolve if you continue to be a supremely naval power. Yeah, you have economic advantages, but you have to be able to walk to the energy. And because Great Britain can't walk to the energy down there in Saudi Arabia without having to cross over Asia, this is where Mackinder's theory came into play. And so now our energy is tied up there in Saudi Arabia. And the Europeans are getting energy from Saudi Arabia. Self-sufficient. So fast forward, environmentalism. What's the scam? The scam is that the West and the Western elites now have to tell all of you at home that you have to get ready to live in a line city, in a micro house, and eat cricket burgers to save the earth. Why? Because they're going to a China-centric global government, a China-centric global economy, a China-centric global society, where the people who get first dibs on the energy are going to be the Chinese. And the Saudis know it. And the Saudis and the Chinese and the elites there in Davos have all cut a deal to make China the center of energy. So the Chinese are going to have oil for their cars, but they won't really need it because the Chinese already have their citizens marching around like robots, right? They got that hive mind working there in Southeast Asia. Um, but they have to get the Americans off of the consumption diet that we've been on for the last 100 years. They have to get us conditioned and ready. And that's what they're doing. That's exactly the story they're telling. You all have to get ready to eat cricket burgers and live in a Alliance City micro house where we strip you of your freedom of movement. Because the best way to control a populace is to put very strict constraints on their freedom of movement. And now the intro to the podcast makes sense, I hope. Right? We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment means to take from you now. Yeah, that's exactly what they mean to take from you. No more oil. We're cutting the oil off, guys. No more oil. The West is not going to have the energy they need. And it's funny, you know, they talk about there being 100% electric vehicles or 50%, whatever, 100% by 2030, 2040, 2050, I don't know. But if every car on the road today was electric, if every car on the road right now today was electric, the power grid wouldn't have enough electricity to even power all those cars. That's the quiet part out loud. That's what they won't tell you. The initiative is meant to usher in a time period of 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 uh of of energy elitism, where energy itself becomes the gatekeeper for elitist aristocratic living. All you people who live in the projects, all you people who live in the ghettos, it doesn't cost that much to build an apartment building. It won't even cost that much to build a smart apartment building, but you'll be limited on how much energy you can use. You know, when the sun goes down and you no longer have solar, take your ass to sleep. That's when we in the aristocratic wine society are going to have our meetings that's when we're going to wake up. Vampires. The idea of vampires. When the sun goes down, that's when the freaks come out. And we're going to have our eyes wide shuts party and our child sacrifice, child trafficking, child molestation, whatever, pedophilia soirees. We're going to do all that when you have to go to sleep because the solar is going to drive your apartment building, your new ghetto. And your new ghetto is going to be great. It's going to be this marvel of architectural design and graphic design and artificial intelligence and cyber connectivity and what do they call it? A virtual reality. You can be whoever you want to be inside the Line City, but you will not be allowed to move about the country, move about the state, even move about your 20-mile radius freely. Right? It's not going to happen. I mean, this is the story of Divergent, right? This was the Divergent story. This is the Hunger Games story, and they're promoting it right now. They're ushering it in right now. They're getting you ready right now. They're saying, look, you could be this great rebel of this little Line City that's roped off from the rest of humanity. We're in control. Get ready for it. And that's the scam here with environmentalism, right? We got to get the West, and that's all it is. It really is just this. We have to get the West, the people of the West who believe in freedom, who believe in individual sovereignty and autonomy, who believe in things like citizenship and unalienable rights. We have to get you guys ready to radically change your energy consumption. And maybe we should change our energy consumption. We certainly have become radical materialists. We certainly have become uh, uh, dependent on a certain radical energy consumption. No doubt, no doubt. We're not living in the natural way. But these people's goal isn't to bring us back to the natural way. Their goal is to enhance and evolve the technology so that we have video games and drugs that keep us occupied. It's an antichrist philosophy. It'd be one thing if they were saying that, you know what, all you guys need to become, the natural way. You guys are too far from the natural order. Let's ramp down all this industrialization and consumerism and get back to a more basic way of life for all of its spiritual advantages, for all of its physical health advantages. That's not what they're saying. They're saying right out in the open, we are going to a pro climate change, pro environmentalism society and philosophy and ideology to phase you out because the robots are better. I mean, this is the stark contrast of the holy war between Christians and transhumanists. This is what we're faced with now. Get the West ready. Change their energy consumption. Why? Because the Saudis are going to have huge, huge dominance in the fourth industrial revolution. They're going to send their oil to China because China has no need to play games about getting oil or carbon conscious. They're not going to play that game. They're not playing that game now, which is why all of our pollution nonsense is just that. All we've done is export. All we've done by sending our manufacturing to China is export our pollution to China where we can't govern the output of pollution. That's all we did. We didn't reduce any pollution. With all of the projections of the environmentalists of going to 100% electric vehicles by 2030, it still will only reduce the carbon emissions 0.00001%. That tells you all you need to know. They want you to sacrifice yourself for an ideology. This is like Jonestown. This is like following Jim Jones. Following these people is like following Jim Jones and drinking the cyanide Kool-Aid. And they get a kick out of it, like I'm sure Jim Jones did. Or maybe he really fucking believed the shit he was saying. Either way, it's the same net result. You end up dead. You end up a slave. You end up locked in a little small Line City in a micro apartment that looks exactly like a jail cell. In fact, it is going to be the exact same size as a jail cell. Only they'll give you enough drugs and video games to be able to cope with the isolation, with the imprisonment, which is a privilege that they are not probably extending to the Uyghurs there, who they're running this imprisonment pilot on right now in China. Again, so happy to be having Rushan on this week and the Family and Friends episode. So they're gonna get you ready, Come off the energy. Get ready for it. We can't have the energy. The Saudis are gonna charge the Europeans triple The Saudis are going to charge the Europeans quadruple for oil. And they got a new oil basin that they found right there in Syria and Israel, right there in the Mediterranean. I mean, in the Black Sea. They got a new oil basin that they found that's going to be infinite. And they're telling you that oil is going to run out. It's not running out. It's not running out anytime soon. It's a lie. I don't believe it. Scam. They're going to shift where the oil is allocated because they know you still need oil. You're still going to need oil to run all of the electric climate-friendly initiatives. But it's going to be China-centric. If you live in Europe, if you're rich and you live in Europe, you're going to have an aristocratic, posh throne, tributary to keep the scam running. And the Europeans and the Americans are on the queue to be the first that get video games and drugs. That's what the entire Yuval Noah Harari climate change, transhumanist, artificial intelligence agenda is about. Now, I want to bring you to this next video here we have of Zbigniew. This is from 11 years back, before Crimea, or right around the time of Crimea. And he says the quiet part out loud about the Ukraine and us putting weapons in the Ukraine that are explicitly aimed at Russia, okay? I mean, if you find this, it's not hidden. It's not hidden. It's amazing to me how many people with the access to the internet, how many people just get caught scrolling these reels and they never double check the facts. They never double check. And in fact, it's hilarious that the stuff that Zbigniew says in this video is is specifically denied by all of the official authoritative fact checkers. If you go look at the fact checkers now, factcheckers.org or what, pick one, Reuters or whoever the fact checkers are, they'll say that we never had offensive weapons in the Ukraine that were intended to target the stability of the Russian regime. That was never what we were doing. We just wanted the Ukraine to be a democracy. We just wanted the Ukraine to come into this global community. Had nothing to do with the Russians. Had nothing to do with the Russian regime. Let's listen to Zbigniew, what Zbigniew has to say. This is 11 years ago. I'm telling you because they got this going a long time ago. You're just now figuring it out, a lot of you at home. They had this scam running for a long time since the great game between the British Empire and the Russian Empire. Let's go. Play the video here.
I was just reading a few days ago an article in Kommersant, which some of you may have read, which deals with both the Russian reaction and the Ukrainian counter-reaction to Ukraine's decision to participate in the Sea Breeze 2011 exercise, which brings into the Black Sea for joint maneuvers with the Ukrainian Navy USS Monterey, which is a missile, I forget whether it's a frigate or a cruiser, but anyway, it's a potent American weapon system. And this brought a reaction from the Russian Foreign Ministry to the following effect, quote, appearance of elements of the United States strategic infrastructure near the Russian border and reconnaissance in the Black Sea are threats to Russian security. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry then responded that it perceives no potential threats to any country in the region on account of this naval exercise. Moscow then responded by saying that, according to a Russian official who was interviewed by Kommersant, that when he, I'm quoting, when he was in the opposition to Viktor Yushchenko, Yanukovych did everything to thwart NATO exercises in Ukraine. Now that he is president, he authorizes them again and in the most provocative manner possible. That actually was contributed by Konstantin Kosachev, chairman of the Duma's Committee on International Affairs. Well, that actually was not the end of it. Kommersant then goes on to report that it has obtained a classified document that Yanukovych is actually boosting cooperation with NATO, energetically and more so than Yushchenko. The document claims that in the framework of the NATO-Ukraine Commission in 2011, Ukraine is actually stepping up its cooperation with NATO to levels considerably higher than previously under Yushchenko. A Russian public official then said, the document we're talking about is a clear indication and proof that Ukraine is anything but independent in the formulation of its foreign policy. It does not mesh with its declared intention to remain out of military political blocs and to abandon the plans to integrate into NATO. I could go on, but this little flap, I think, is symptomatic of a reality which is much more complex than many of us feared, which is still uncertain in its final outcome. And much of that depends on internal developments, both in Russia and in the Ukraine. But it is also my own view that as time passes, and if the next 5 or so years lead to further consolidation of Ukrainian statehood, a sea change will occur in the Russian psyche of the type that historically occurred only after a number of decades after the Bolshevik Revolution, but quite a few decades, until about 1950s, 1960, regarding the Russian attitude towards Poland. Namely, that this is genuinely a separate country, genuinely a separate nation, with whom it is desirable to have good relations, and which nonetheless is not going to forsake its independence for the sake of unilaterally defined character of these good relations. And that brings me to my final comment, and I'll stop right there. It seems to me that if that condition prevails, something else very desirable is likely to take place. Namely, that in fact and paradoxically, the initial concentration on better relations with Russia, the avoidance of head-on conflicts with Russia, may have the paradoxical effect not only of consolidating Ukrainian independence, but of facilitating its more stable and more cooperative relationship with the West, in turn facilitating a similar movement by Russia. Because in fact, a Ukraine that is on good relations with Russia, but moving forward towards the West, is a Ukraine which is going to have a suction effect, together with the European Union, of Russia's own definition of its long-term future. So this is, in brief, how I sense the historical dynamics, and this is also one of the reasons why I attach my own personal sympathies aside enormous importance to how Ukraine evolves. I used to say that if Ukraine is suborned by Russia, which I now think is less likely, Russia again becomes an empire. But now I think even further, that if Ukraine is not suborned, Russia is much more likely to become European.
Zbig, terrific lead-off comments. I'm sure you'll get a lot of questions on.
Hey, I'm just bringing you the facts. Please call me crazy. 11 years ago. This is long before the first bomb. And you know what's crazy to me? When these fucking aristocratic elites talk like this right out in the open, how hard do you think it is for Vladimir Putin to find it? I mean, if we can find it, if any average guy with an internet connection can find it, how hard do you think it is for our enemies to find it? I mean, how either arrogant or in on the conspiracy, the global conspiracy, do you have to be to say exactly what he just said right out there in the open? He knows. He knows who he is he knows who he is in the international community. He knows the how far his words go. He knows what he means to the intellectual traditions and the world of academia and really foreign policy. I mean, you're talking about a man who was the foreign policy director for and consultant for a number of sitting presidents. He said right out there in the open that a subdued, Ukraine under the Russian influence creates a Russian empire, that Ukraine that becomes its own independent nation, which is very recent. He said right there, it's very recent. It's very recent that the Ukraine is its own empire. In fact, is their own country. In fact, they're really not their own country. We're actually working on trying to get the people there to authentically believe that the Ukraine is its own country, and in turn get the Russians to see the Ukraine as its own country that will have the suction effect of making the Russians view themselves as European. That was the goal. That is the goal. And Vladimir Putin said, fuck y'all. We're Russian. This is the arrogance too, right? This is an arrogance because the Poles, they think because the Germanics, the Germans, the German war machine came across and the Poles all but said, oh, oy vey, we're with you guys, right? And the Ukrainians as well, the Germanics in the Ukraine, the white Russians, they think because all of them were amenable to this Nazi-centric worldview that the Russians will play ball too. The Russians aren't going to play ball. They gave up 18 million. I think the number is 18 million. I'm not 100% certain, but it's in the millions. Tens of millions of Russian soldiers died to hold off the Nazi ideology and the Nazi war machine. And yeah, they were communists, they were Bolsheviks, and I'm not apologetic or promoting that the Bolshevik ideology or the communist ideology is in any way efficacious, for any society anywhere. But they were also Russian, and they also have a very keen sense of the Russian identity. Do they have communist influence? Yes, but as I explained, so do we here, obviously, quite obviously, especially after hearing that. I mean, these people are scheming right out there in the open, scheming against the Russians. I mean, they're doing it right out there, basically calling you stupid. That's what's happening. Daddy Brzezinski and Kissinger and Klaus, they all think you're stupid. In fact, they know you're stupid because they helped usher in the stupidity. This was the color television. This was professional sports. This was fast food. This was the EPA. And this was what became the civil rights movement. And then it was wokeism. And now it's social justice. Now your kids getting, hormonal blockers in the student counselor guidance office, and you don't even know about it, or they're vaccinating them without your permission. Now they're arresting Christians right out in the streets. Now they're arresting Christians just for being Christians right out there in the streets. Now they're going to use wokeism at the tip of the spear of radical materialism and consumerism and media propaganda, Operation Paperclip, DARPA, the military operation, or the military institution, or the military agency that created the internet. Now they're going to use all the weapons that they've amassed in brainwashing to tell you that we're just in the Ukraine trying to uphold democracy. No, they're trying to subdue Russia, both politically and militarily, but more so psychologically. I mean, they are willing to go all out, and this is why you see our political elites right now triple and quadruple down on the Ukraine, even though we can't afford it, even though there's no real military strategic interest that we see for ourselves as citizens. This is why you don't see the national interest, because you don't understand that the Trilateral Commission and its figureheads like Brzezinski are saying we have got to subdue Russia, and the way to subdue Russia is through the Ukraine. The Ukrainians need to become European, and the Russians need to start to view themselves as European. And if not, the opposite, the flip side of that coin is that Russia becomes a great empire. This was 11 years ago. This is at the heart of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I can't say it any more clear than that. Let's mark the time down so we can make sure we clip it. This is at the heart of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Papa Brzezinski said it himself 11 years ago. If Ukraine can maintain its independence, if Ukraine can become its own nation and start to really think of itself as its own nation, it will have a suction effect on the Russians, who will then start to view themselves as European also. and they're willing to spend as much of your money as they need to in order to achieve that. The same slave-like uh, maneuver that the Japanese tried on the Chinese people is the same slave-like maneuver that your elites have already done to you. It's just an economic slavery. It's a wage slavery. It's a serfdom. They're going to use the full faith and credit of the American people and American citizenship and the power of our dollar and our nation's borders to supplement and fund this effort in the Ukraine to subdue the Russians at the behest of the crown. It's still the crown. It's still Mackinder's World Island theory. It's still that the Ukraine and the Eastern Europe controls and will be the springboard to world dominance for the entire Eurasian world island. We don't need these people. We don't need these people. And this is what the Mikas and Morning Joes will never talk about. They won't even go back and show Mika's dad, Brzezinski, laying out how the Ukraine is this strategic military interest, this strategic global economic interest of the West, and this power dynamic between Russia and the Ukraine. They won't even acknowledge that. Their whole story is what, Tanner? That Vladimir Putin is a tyrant, and he's guilty of war crimes, and he's evil and unpredictable, and he's crazy. Well, please call me crazy. I just heard from the horse's mouth himself. I don't know Vladimir Putin personally. I know what he says, but I don't believe that he is who he says he is. And it's not necessary for me to believe that Vladimir Putin is who he says he is to know that Zbigniew Brzezinski is telling us exactly who he is. I mean, he's not dancing around it at all. We are going to use the Ukraine to try and facilitate the Russians to come into a more European identity. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's a ridiculous ambition, to say the least. So, and I showed you all that, and I brought you Zbigniew for you to go on your own line of research, your own investigation into who he is and what the Trilateral Commission was and what it does, and understand that these are all things that people are going to say are conspiracy theories. These are wonky tinfoil hat theories. There's nothing wonky or tinfoil hat about it. The man is saying in his own words on a global stage from an academic think tank, we are going to use the Ukrainians to try and subdue the Russians. He said it. You got to think. If you watch this podcast or you listen to this podcast and you go back out into the world, I know many of you must just think to yourselves, how stupid can people possibly be to believe this shit? And when you hear that, you have to then go to all of these authoritative publications like the New York Times, and the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, or pick one, pick any one. You have to go to those publications now, read the headlines, and go, wow, they really are in on it. Because they heard the same Zbigniew Brzezinski soundbite that we just played. They have access to it. In fact, they probably facilitated. They probably helped sponsor the forum or the summit or whatever it was he was speaking at. They probably paid his speaker's fee, as a matter of fact. Okay? They heard it. They know it. This is the battle plan. The only person that the battle plan doesn't include is you, the free people of the world. You, the free people of America. You are stupid. You're dumb. We're smart. You're dumb. We're going to tell you exactly what we want you to think, and you're going to think it, and you're going to like it. You're going to love it. Nothing more to hold all this narrative together about climate change and global governance than a little sprinkle of wokeism, right? A little sprinkle of wokeism. What's the glue that's going to hold it together? That's what the LGBTQism is. And you know what? God bless all of the gays and lesbians out there right now that are standing up and saying, enough is enough. I mean, the gays and lesbians are showing more heart than some of you Christians. Let's just keep it real. The gays and lesbians out there are showing more heart than some of you Christians. I'm seeing countless gays and lesbians stand up and say, the pride flag does not represent me. The American flag represents me. The American flag represents my rights and citizenship. The pride flag has now been hijacked to represent something far darker and deeper and more pernicious and deceitful and wicked than the rights, the basic constitutional rights of a person who has same-sex orientation, same-sex appetites, whatever you want to call it. And they're standing up, and God bless those people. God bless. I said it the other day, didn't I? I said the other day that the adult lesbians and gays who have some integrity about themselves whatsoever, despite their flaws, their sexual flaws, in my opinion, my Christian worldview. But despite that, many of them need to step up and separate themselves from this child pedophilia. And that's a rightful separation to make. And anybody out there who can make that distinct separation is not playing in the right pond. Yeah, people are going to have a lifelong journey to try and clarify their will and ultimately their faith. But there are small wins along the way. Yeah, every prophet in the Bible, with the exception of Jesus Christ, but all the other, Moses murdered, an Egyptian guard and had great remorse and sorrow about it. Felt terrible about it. Did that stop him from coming down from Mount Sinai with the tablets and the commandments? No, because your God is a merciful God. Your God is a forgiving God. This is one of the scams that the transhumanists and the Satanists and the Luciferians don't want you to realize. They want you to feel that your sin or that your flaws or your mistakes are a final destination. And not even more so, a predestination that you can never come back from. It's not the case. It's a trick. God forgives. It shows that in Scripture multiple times. God is a forgiving God. And our people in the lesbian and gay community aren't excluded from that forgiveness. They're just not excluded from that. Of course they can repent. Of course they can come back into God's grace and God's in God's love. Of course. But first and foremost is we're not going to let you indoctrinate our young children with pedophile ideology. And this ideology, I'm going to show you right here, right now, today. Because when Zbigniew says global cooperation, when he says the collaboration between economy and military and climate and the challenge of climate is mind-boggling, the potential, this is what he's talking about. We got a three for here. We're gonna get you all here at once. Play the Anne Hathaway clip. Let's play it. Let me show you what we're talking about here.
My standing here, my ability to be visible to you comes from the world unfairly rewarding my particular type of visibility. It is important to acknowledge that, with the exception of being a cisgender male, everything about how I was born has put me at the current center of a damaging and widely accepted myth. That myth is that gayness orbits around straightness, transgender orbits around cisgender, and that all races orbit around whiteness. But this myth is too real for too many. I appreciate this community so much because it's where I learned to reject this myth. I appreciate this community because together, we are not just going to question this myth, we are going to destroy it. Authentic equality doesn't prioritize sexual orientation. It doesn't put any one gender or race at the center. It doesn't erase our identities either. What it does do is centralize love. And when love is fully centralized, every door opens for everybody. To this beloved community, to Ella, it's an honor to be your ally. This award means so much to me because it comes from you. Now let's tear this world apart and build a better one. Thank you.
That was 5 years ago, guys. That was 5 years ago. These psycho, posh, yuppie, liberal, omnisexual, cosmopolitan, aristocratic, wine society white women are going to destroy the world. And I'm not saying it, she said it. Because when she really says, oh, is transgenderism doesn't orbit around cisgenderism, or gayness doesn't orbit around straightness, or all races don't orbit around whiteness. What she's saying is that the world doesn't revolve around America. What she's saying is that the idea of freedom and equality doesn't revolve around the United States Constitution, or that freedom and equality doesn't revolve around God, doesn't revolve around one true living God, a creator that grants unalienable rights. And when she says that we're going to centralize love, it's funny. What she really means is we're going to centralize government. We're going to centralize government. We're going to call it love. But really, she wants to centralize the state. The Human Rights Campaign, funded by the Open Society, founded by George Soros. You are looking at the shills of George Soros right out there in the open. A man who went door to door as a teenager with the Nazis and took possessions from the Jews. And let me just clear this up for those who don't really understand the context and dynamic there. When people went to go take things from the Jews, took their possessions, they didn't take the possessions. They didn't just take possessions. It wasn't just them stealing. They killed them. They killed them and then they took their shit. That's how it went down. That's the reality, okay? This is who George Soros was, a Jew himself, but an anti-Jew. Didn't believe in God, doesn't believe in God. Henry Kissinger, anti-Jew, doesn't believe in God. Brzezinski, the Poles, they hate the Jews. They hate the idea of God. This is the reality. This is what we're living on. These are the people we're living under. The Anne Hathaways of the world. We are living under a posh, yuppie, liberal, omnisexual, cosmopolitan, aristocratic wine society. These people are horrifying. What is she even saying here? Let's destroy, let's burn down this world and make a new one? Make a new one in whose image? The Human Rights Campaign? George Soros' image? Who is she working for? They want you to remember her as the cinematic classic Devil Wears Prada, and think that she's gonna make the world, that she's leading a rebellion against the world here, like she was against the magazine there in the movie, right? And that was a great movie. One we got to throw off the shelves now, obviously, because these people are Satanists. Right? The Devil Wearing Prada is actually Anne Hathaway in the movie. Plot twist. Not only was Meryl Streep a devil wearing Prada, but Anne Hathaway was also a devil in Prada as well, alongside her, as we see now. A real devil in the real world. And did she admit that she was transgender in that video? That that was weird. No, she said something like, yeah, but before that in the same speech, she said something to the effect of everything about the way I was born, with the exception of being uh, a cisgender male. Oh, she okay. That's the caveat she was making. Everything about her whiteness is a privilege, with the one exception that she's not a cisgender male, which they have to create a little caveat for, because ultimately the Me Too movement is the one that they're going to use to try and bring down the hammer on anybody who stands up and tries to reject this crazy feminist liberal movement. Just want to say it's always helpful to mention that Jeffrey Epstein was on record saying that the way of the future is the way women think. That the future is for the way women think. The way men think is for the past. It's not by accident that a pedophile and sex trafficker and deviant, wicked dude working for the government too, in many ways, in my opinion, working for the government would have this affectation for feminism. He's not doing it just to hide his debauchery. That's what some people would say. Oh, well, he was doing that just to hide it. Come on. Come on. The man was neck deep in sex trafficking and sexual scandal. This same group of people, these omnisexual globalists, these omnisexual cosmopolitan wine society aristocrats, they really think this. The way of the future is for the way women think because they want to subdue you. The way women think is as little confrontation as possible, as little physical confrontation as possible. That's why when I was at the front of the George Floyd marches, they resented it because I would not affirm that just being a black woman is a revolution, that just being a woman is a revolution, that black trans lives have to matter first for all lives to matter, that this convergence of identity politics and marginalization is the only way of the future. That's how women think. And another way women think is they lie to themselves and tell them that an ideology like that really informs their daily decisions when really they're just schizo. They're schizophrenic. These wine society white women are hopped up on antidepressants and they're drinking, Cabernet with it or Merlot or Malbec or whatever they're doing, whatever they're, tequila, whatever the fuck they're drinking. They're drinking all this shit together and they're schizo. Their mind is fragmented. They have no clue what ideology really informs the way that they think, let alone the things that they do. And that's how you could have an entire Western movement led by these posh, yuppie, white psycho bitches that says identity and marginalization is at the center of the future. But they get all their products from a place where there is no consideration of the marginalized groups. The CCP, who manufactures all their goods, who makes all the parts for their cars, who gets them their antibiotics when they got, gonorrhea from their Tinder hookup or whatever, they don't care about the marginalized. They kill the marginalized in China, black bag them, silence them, disappear them. That's what they do in China. In fact, they kill their own people. The Chinese are so radical materialists, they view their own people as expendable in service of the greater good, body in service to the mind. In China, the hive mind, the idea of this totalitarian, transhuman, technocratic empire. And the white women are following right behind them. And the white men, the cucks who really just want power, they're standing right next to them as the safest place. The safest place next to the shooter is right behind him. The safest place to be when there's a shooter is right behind him, directly behind him, right? Out of that line of fire. This is who's running the world today. And I just want to bring you back to Zbigniew Brzezinski and let you dive into what the mainstream media would call tinfoil or conspiracy rabbit hole of these post-World War II democratic liberal order politicians and thought leaders. These are the people that laid the battle plans and laid the philosophical framework for the foreign policy today, the Council on Foreign Relations. The list goes on and on and on and on. These people are in charge of the world. There's no doubt about it. And where they're not in charge, they're willing to spend your money to go and assert themselves, to take charge. I hope you guys will enjoy our Family and Friends episode that will air either tomorrow or Wednesday with Rushan Abbas, the Uyghur advocate whose sister was taken by the CCP in 2018, and hear her story about being a Uyghur there in China and what it's like to live under the CCP's regime, since many out there seem to think that it's going to be this great paradise of technology and freedom. One last video to play here before we head out. And I found this one on Instagram, and I think a lot of people are putting these mashup videos together on Instagram, and they, while some of them are a little, what do you want to call, they're a little extreme. I mean, I don't want to say extreme, but they're piecing stuff together. But I think some of them hit the nail right on the head. and this was one that certainly stuck out to me, that shows you who Klaus Schwab is and his affection with the CCP, and how the CCP is really, people think that we're following the CCP when really the history shows we taught the CCP how to be who they are today, and we're just cashing in on our invention, on our creation, right? Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein. That's who the West has been with the CCP. Play the video.
Like most globalists, Schwab regards communist China as a shining model of how he intends to transform the world.
We now welcome His Excellency Xi Jinping. China has made significant economic and social achievements under your leadership.
Chinese influence on global affairs is growing. The founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, says that this is what motivated the group this year to invite President Xi Jinping to deliver the keynote address in Davos.
Schwab said Xi's presence was a sign of the shift from a unipolar world dominated by the United States to a more multipolar system in which rising powers like China will have a step up and play a bigger role.
Artificial intelligence, the metaverse, synthetic biology, who masters those technologies will be the master of the world.
Who master those technologies will be the masters of the world. They're not hiding it. Klaus Schwab, he's not hiding it. Inspired by the CCP. They weren't inspired. They inspired the CCP, and now they're using the CCP as a scapegoat, as a model, detached, disconnected from the American everyday way, the everyday way of life for the American citizen. Yeah, we know we get our goods there, but how things go there in China are not familiar to us, just from a proximity standpoint. Right? That's a world away, but they're working on things in China that will absolutely blow your mind. And it's also fitting for me to say I think we're going to run the Rushan interview on Wednesday, because tomorrow I will certainly have to address the Donald Trump indictment, which I wanted to do today, but I think tomorrow will be even better after the events unfold tomorrow. I believe that Donald Trump plans to turn himself in, of which he'll probably be released and on bail in a few hours' time, but he plans to turn himself in this entire document scandal there in Florida with the secret documents. So I want to really I'm going to spend the entire hour tomorrow, the entire 90 minutes tomorrow, talking about this indictment and this lawfare and this. And again, another thing that they're doing right out in the open. Rachel Maddow says, hey, if Donald Trump will drop out of the race, then maybe we can find some leeway in his indictment or in his case. Said it right on TV, right? Lawfare, legal blackmail, quid pro quo prosecution. This is the undermining of America's justice system and the rule of law. We have to consider now what the rule of law really means when our lawmakers are all corrupt. Scary times we live in. Banana Republic, kangaroo courts. So I'm going to talk about Donald Trump tomorrow, and we'll have that episode tomorrow, the Trump indictment and turning himself in, if that's what he decides to do. If he doesn't, what it means for us, the American people. But I wanted to say it because one of the hallmarks of Donald Trump's presidency was his pushback against a China-centric society. It was a pushback against our trade deal and our trade alliance with China. And now they're coming to take him out. What does that say? What does that say? China will not be the new horizon. It will be the inception of a global scale slavery, a technocratic slave system. And Klaus Schwab said it right there. Those who harness the power of technology will be the masters of the world, not hide. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and now powered by TireGet.com. We appreciate your viewership and listenership now and in the future. The fight continues. As always, Godspeed.